The World Cup is in full swing. Many players have been sent home already, and in the men's event there are only 16 players left. In the women's event only 8. We are going to have a look at the round 5 encounter between world's number 1 Magnus Carlsen and Vasyl Ivanchuk, the legend who is among the top players for more than 3 decades. He's just a brilliant player, and if someone is capable of knocking out the world champion, former world champion, out of the tournament, it's the legendary Ukrainian player. And it's very interesting that these two players are meeting each other now in this event, because before the tournament, Vasyl Ivanchuk was not allowed to play in the World Cup because of the situation in his home country, Ukraine. And very strong grandmaster started a petition to let Ivanchuk participate, and eventually he is there in round 5 in Baku, and that was also thanks to the signature of the former world's champion and current world's number 1 Magnus Carlsen. Let's have a look at their game. Just before I gonna show you this game, small apologies for the fact that my situation here is not ideal in the hotel room. I'm here in Eindhoven doing some coaching for the World Youth Olympiad, which is taking place here. So I'm here for the rest of the week, and hopefully the quality is not bothering you too much and you're going to enjoy this game. Also make sure to subscribe to the channel. And then I'm going to show you that Magnus Carlsen started with 1d4, d5, knight f3, e6, c4, knight f6, g3, the Catalan opening. Bishop b4, one of the more solid and reliable continuations. And after bishop d2 check, the bishop goes back to e7. It's a typical maneuver saying that, okay, I could have gone at once to the e7 square, but now the bishop is on d2. The knight can no longer be developed to that square, at least not for the moment. Bishop g2. Black goes c6, very rock-solid setup in the spirit of the Slav opening. White goes queen c2. Black goes knight bd7. White goes bishop f4. And black castles. And here, interesting moment, because white could have castled already for a number of moves, but he consciously refrained from doing so. I'm going to show you not all the ins and outs, but nowadays in situations where white is going to castle, there's a typical plan for black based on the move knight e4, trying to start advancing the pawn to f5. Maybe later on the other pawn will come to g5. Looks very risky to advance your pawns in front of your king from black's perspective, but it's in fact a very ambitious way of trying to fight for the initiative, and black has very nice control over that square. And having that in mind, Magnus comes up with a relatively unknown continuation, which is the move h4. Really remarkable idea, but now it's okay, maybe not immediately with the idea to launch a kingside attack with his h-pawn, but definitely you're preventing black from advancing its pawns on the king side. And okay, it's a bit strange, of course. You are weakening your king's position, but here Ivanchuk decides to strike back in the center with the move d takes c4, queen takes c4, and now the move knight d5, attacking the bishop. And now second point of white's h-pawn has been revealed as the bishop goes to g5. Of course, black doesn't want to trade off the bishops. White's going to recapture with the h-pawn, opening up the h-file. Very soon the queen can come back to this diagonal, threatening checkmate, and that will force black to make further concessions. Therefore, black says, okay, I'm not minding the exchange of bishops. I'm going to play h6, take on e7, queen recaptures, and okay, black is having a slightly passive position, but once he's able to get his bishop into play, he should be doing absolutely fine. Very logical move would be to play knight c3, for instance, but instead Magnus played here the move e4, attacking the knight. Knight goes to b6 with tempo, attacking the queen. Now the queen comes back to c3, and I think that Magnus thought that he's doing okay here. Why? He has 2 pawns in the center. Pawns on c6 and e6 are preventing the light squared bishop from joining play, but it could be that he just overlooked black's response here, as Ivanchuk played the move e5. Very nice move. It's a pawn sacrifice, which was not accepted by Magnus. He decided to castle, but I just want to show you that after d takes e5, the idea is to go knight a4, attacking the queen, and the queen has difficulties to keep the pawn on e5 protected. If you play the move queen d4, Then there is the move knight d2 c5, protecting the knight and opening up the d file for the rook to come over to attack the queen. Maybe later on the knight will come to d3 with check. Also the pawn on b2 can be taken after that. Black is having quite some nice activity with its pieces and already having a small lead in development. Another possibility is that if you go back with the queen to c2, it's maybe a safer square for the queen to go to, but then it's queen b4 check, and the pawn on b2 will be taken next. So Magnus, okay, he didn't take the pawn, he castled, but now after e takes d4, queen takes d4, technically speaking, the position should be okay for black. Having an extra pawn in the center as white versus a pawn on c6, I don't think that the bishop on g2 is very impressive. Knight c5, it's a good move, and white goes rook c1, putting pressure on that knight. And here the big question is, what is black going to do with that knight? If the knight goes back to e6, then, okay, the queen comes to e3, and the knight is obstructing the bishop, so that's not looking great. But wait a second, the pawn on e4 is hanging. Black could have taken the pawn, but didn't do it. And I'm not sure what is the exact reason, to be honest. I think, okay, rook e1 is a logical idea to pin the knight. The knight can't go away as the queen will be hanging. But if you play f5, let's say knight c3, at best, I think white is able to regain the pawn. But even that, it's not entirely clear. Black is going to play here rook d8, and looks like it's an open game with chances for both sides. Instead, Ivanchuk had a different idea, and in a way, his choice surprised me a bit. He played knight a6. Knight is not doing that well at the side of the board, although it's also not really vulnerable. Still, black is rock solid. Knight bd2, bishop g4, finally bishop comes out. And here also Magnus understands that the bishop on g2, it's not looking great at all, and is now rerouted to the other diagonal to attack that knight on a6. So white has the idea of taking on a6, ruining the structure on the queen side. Rook a8, hitting the queen. Queen goes to e3, and okay, black is fully developed now. Both sides are fully developed, and the question is what to play. I mean, his move, Ivanchuk played here the move knight c7. It's absolutely fine, solid continuation. But a more dynamical option would have been here to play f5, to put pressure against the pawn on e4 to get the rook involved as well. Now after bishop takes a6, b takes a6, okay, your pawns may look vulnerable, but you do get counterplay. Black has a lot of piece activity, and know that white is not recommended here to advance the pawn to e5 because of the move f4. And you're attacking the queen, attacking the pawn, the knight will come into d5. It's all of a sudden black who's taking over. So maybe this was sort of a little chance to sharpen things up and put Magnus under pressure. Instead, Ivanchuk decided to stay solid. Knight c7, and here a4. Very nice idea, intending to launch the a-pawn and putting pressure against that pawn on a7 once the knight goes away. The knight went back to c8 right away. Pawn goes to a5. And here, I think everything is still under control. If black decides to stay solid with rook f8, there are no weaknesses. It's hard to believe that black is going to suffer here. But maybe Ivanchuk saw something very deep, something very brilliant I'm not aware of. But the move he played, it's something I was really struggling to understand, frankly speaking. He decided to trade off the bishop for the knight. And if we just look at white's knights, they are not impressive at all. There's this typical rule that knights which are protecting each other, they are also restricting each other's mobility. And I think this is another example of that theme. I really don't understand why black would give up that bishop from an open position. Now, after knight takes f3, white is in absolute control. Black goes a6, preventing white ever carrying out that pawn break to ruining the structure on the queen side. So he goes a6, and now Magnus is going to show you how to seize the initiative. And he starts here with a beautiful activation of its queen's rook. The rook on a1 isn't doing anything yet. It's brought into play via the 4th rank. Black goes rook fe8, now e5. White is marching with its e-pawn, clearing the 4th rank for the rook. For instance, if you go knight e6, now rook g4, the rook all of a sudden joins the attack with the threat of taking on h6 as the pawn on g7 is pinned. So instead, black Played here the move knight d5, so attacking the queen, no time to swing over with the rook yet to g4. Queen b3, queen goes far away, but look at this queen. It's also a nice, very subtle move. Keeping an eye on the pawn on b7, even though that pawn is protected at the moment. It's a source of problems potentially later on, as the pawn is fixed by the pawn on a5. Black goes knight a7, and here the knight is on its way to b5, but here bishop d3. Look what white is planning to do. The bishop has the idea to go back to b1, setting up a battery with queen and bishop to threaten checkmate on h7. And now you can think black has a lot of ways to deal with it. Well, things are not that simple, because black is not inclined to make any new concessions regarding pawn moves in front of its king. The best way to play her, which was not played in the game, is the move knight c7, with the idea that after bishop to b1, knight e6, queen c2, threatening this checkmate pattern, black can drop back with a knight to f8. And this is a very, very nice economical way of holding your position together. Of course, the knight isn't great, but all the threats have been parried. White is just better, but it's still a game. Instead, Ivanchuk played knight b5. Now the bishop goes to b1 anyway. And for instance, if black would play a random move now, queen c2 could be played. And how are you going to defend the mating threat on h7? If you play g6, then white has the move h5. And here we see how useful that pawn is for multiple reasons. You can't really move your g-pawn because of mating threat on h7. So black instead played here the move h5 to prevent the white h-pawn from coming forward. And look, Magnus plays so very nice positional chess. His rook on c1 has done its job. It goes back to e1 to further give more input to its own attack. It's supporting the pawn. In certain cases, maybe the move e6 could be played. If black would play here g6, then the key idea is to play the move g4. This is real power play. After hg4, rook g4, you have all your pieces in the attack. You're planning to go e6 and h5, trying to remove these pawns from f7 and g6, and then it's just a crushing mating attack. Therefore, instead of playing the move g6, knight dc7 was played to try to gain control over the e6 square. Queen c2, renewing the mating threat. Black goes g6. Of course, white can't play the move h5 here. You may think, what is the bishop doing now? Well, Magnus had anticipated it all. Play the move bishop to a2, attacking the pawn on f7. Not really the pawn on f7, but in particular the pawn on g6, because the f pawn is not a good defender. Queen takes g6 is a serious threat. If you would play knight e6 now to close the diagonal, it's knight g5. And white is about to take on e6, fe6, and then take on g6, opening up that king side. If you take on g5, then it's queen takes g6, and you take that pawn next, the knight can be taken. It's absolutely game over. So black is advised here to step out of that diagonal. The king goes to g7. And now various interesting options. I really like this move g4 once again, so that you're preparing the rook to come over to the side where it really wants to be. Magnus had a different idea. Play the move knight g5, attacking the pawn on f7, also a good move. Rook f8, and now he played the move e6. Look at the brilliant cooperation of white's pieces. They are all controlling the e6 square. So if black is going to capture, eventually white is going to end up with a knight on e6 with a huge knight forward winning material, or even more. How should black cope with all these threats? I think it's a difficult moment, but maybe the best move here is something like knight d4, trying to fight back with your knight, attacking the queen. Knight is supported by the rook. Queen c3 can be met by knight cb5, so the queen is badly placed. That would be an awful idea. According to the machine, the best move now is to sacrifice the exchange. This is very hard to see, but I guess this was Magnus's idea. You would really love to take on e6, but the rook on e1 is hanging. If you take the pawn on f7, the rook takes f7, e-pawn is pinned, so you can't take the rook. That's not good. Therefore, instead, you probably got to go back first to f3 to attack the rook, to protect your own rook as well. If the rook goes away, then you take on f7, attacking the queen. Queen goes away, and after something like knight e5, it's clear that white has fantastic compensation for the exchange with a huge pawn on f7. There's still a lot to play for, but it's a fight with a material imbalance, so that is the best practical chance for the defender. Ivanchuk played the move f6, but now pawn on g6 is no longer defended, and Magnus realizes he doesn't have to move its knight. Play the move bishop to b1. Absolute brilliant move. If you take the knight, it's queen takes g6, king h8, you take on h5, and after king g8, for instance, you go rook e5 with the idea to take on g5, even the other rook can come over. It's just a completely crushing attack for white. Therefore now the f-pawn will have to move again. It goes to f5, so the queen and bishop are no longer needed on that diagonal. And what does white do? Change plans, because you would like to put your knight on f7. But if you play knight f7, it's rook takes f7. And once again, you can't recapture because the rook on e1 is unprotected. But the key move here is queen c1. Ooh, this is such a beautiful move. You're protecting your rook. But now the plan is to go for the move knight f7 at the right moment, so that you can get in with your queen to h6. Beautiful mating attack via the dark squares. It's just one of the many ideas white has. Rook d5 was played, bishop a2, attacking the rook. Rook goes to c5, and now the queen is centralized again. I like this play very much, and it's not clear to me what black is supposed to do. Knight d5 was played. Looks as if black is getting some additional tempos, hitting the queen. But the main problem is that after queen to d2, his rook on c5 doesn't have many squares to go to. Black played rook f6. Now again, you understand that knight f7 is not a good idea because of rook takes e6. Don't rush here. But the move b4 is just very nice. You're attacking the rook. Rook is in trouble. Can only go to c3. And now it's time to harvest. You can take the pawn by taking twice on d5. First you capture the knight, then you take the pawn. So white is a pawn up. It is not just a random pawn. This pawn on e6 is paralyzing black's position. The queen can't move because the e-pawn will be pushed. Black is dead lost here. Played f4, but the pawn can just be taken. This is game over. For instance, if you would take on f4, it's queen e5 with a double attack. If you block with the rook, well, then at least you have knight e4 winning material thanks to a knight fork and a huge pin. While in case of queen f6, well, then you can just take the queen, and then the e-pawn is decisive. That is game over. Instead of taking on f4, Ivanchuk played here the move rook f5, but now it's queen e4, and Ivanchuk resigned. But you may think why he resigned. Does white have a concrete threat? Well, that's the thing. There's not a concrete threat, but black also doesn't have any good move here. You're 2 pawns down, and white is definitely going to play rook a1, rook ad1 with the idea to enter on d7. It's just a simple plan to improve your worst piece again. And if that happens, black's position is falling apart very soon. One typical line here could be knight d6 to attack the queen. Thereafter queen to d4, double attack on the rook and king, queen f6. Now it's time to take on d6, and it's game over. White is a piece up. Anyway, after the move queen e4, black resigns. Absolutely a miracle that this happened. Miracle in the sense that, I mean, it's not a surprise that Magnus wins against Ivanchuk, but the way he plays, it's something you don't see every day. I think this was by far Magnus, his best game of the tournament so far. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you like this game, or do you think there are better games played by Magnus? I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and I would appreciate all your support. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye bye.